Dag, thank you so much for joining me. As I said just before we started recording formally, you're very tanned. How is life for you at the moment?
It's quite lovely here in Sweden. We have summer has started, so we're really enjoying ourselves.
Fantastic. That's wonderful. Just so before we go deep into a lot of your great expertise, I'd love to know a little bit about who is Dag Detter. Tell us a bit about your background and who you are.
I'm a banker by background, and now I'm specializing in extracting value out of public assets. It's the largest asset segment in the world, but also the most hidden one, strangely.
And this is what you're doing now full time. This is your
Yes.
your role. Fantastic. And who are the people who are interested in hearing about this? Who are your clients for this?
I mean, ultimately, it's either on the investor side or on the government side. And then there's lots of people in between, like bankers, consultancy firms, accounting firms, law firms, etc. So there's a whole. I mean, it's very centered around, you could say, the financial. It's a financial market topic.
Yeah, solution for financial markets. Fantastic.
Yeah.
And what is the actual outcome? Because I always like to say to experts and speakers, so what? What if they
Yeah.
probably presume what's the outcome that they will get?
I like that question actually, but no, I mean the outcome is that you could say in today's world that we don't use as much taxes. That there is another way of funding public services, which is using the balance sheet, which is what you as a private person does every day, and any corporate would do. They try to get some yield, get some returns out of their assets, and for a government or a public sector institute, this is less obvious because they don't have balance sheets. So this is why it's not talked about so much. But they do have a lot of assets. They're usually I mean, they are. It is an asset segment which is twice global capital markets, and the public sector is usually the most dominant real estate investor in any city in the developed world, at least.
I don't think we ever think of it in that way, though, do we? We don't. I mean, you putting it in those words, I'm sort of having that realization. I'm thinking, actually, that makes sense. It's quite obvious, but I don't think we ever discuss it or think about it in that way, do we?
No, it's because we don't have in the public sector don't publish. They don't even have a balance sheet in the way that governments force us as individuals or corporates to publish, which is, I think, rather ironic. But now, post-COVID, one, when we have so much debt, but also because we're trying to finance a lot of investments, and most politicians' knee-jerk reaction is to raise taxes, and that shouldn't be necessary if you look at the balance sheet.
But is it as simple as that? That because they don't have a balance sheet, surely it's not as simple as saying, right, let's have a balance sheet and now it's all resolved.
I'm afraid it is.
You're
But
crazy.
let me give
No.
you. No, but it sounds too simple to be true. But let me put it like this. I mean, if you uh, when you go to a doctor or you have some problem with your health, uh, the physiotherapist, the doctor, they might have very simple solutions for you. And it's if you have certain types of ailments, and that is you need to exercise, and you know that you've heard it since 20 years back. But what do you do about it? Nothing, because it takes an effort. So even if people knew that balance sheet would could complement taxes, governments are still not likely to do it until the pressure is there. Let's call it a heart attack. Let's call it a serious injury that you have broken your leg, or so that you really are forced to it. You can't really avoid it. You have to lose weight. Lose weight is not fun.
No, absolutely not. And I know about this now, of course, having spent some time in lockdown where you eat too much. But anyway, that's a different
Yeah,
topic. Different topic. So, is this why governments haven't done it before? Because it's just painful. It's difficult.
yeah. It's. I mean, I think the human reaction is the same as, okay, your knee is bad. So what can I do about it? Well, lose 20 kilos and start exercising. I mean, you don't want to hear that because you want to continue living as before. But it's so easy just to keep eating. It's so easy to keep raising taxes because there's no effort on me. But if I put the same pressure on my government as I would do on a corporate or a private individual who has assets and income that needs to be taxed, that's quite a lot of work.
And do you think the solution is the fact that we are under pressure now because of COVID? Do you think that will help tip things over the edge, or do we need to apply pressure ourselves in some way?
I do think that individuals, I mean, anybody who thinks that just raising taxes as a knee-jerk reaction is not always the right solution. I think anybody who think in those terms needs to react because otherwise it's just going to be the easy way out. I mean, it's like having a partner which is who is just you know adding more weight, complaining about its knee, but not doing anything about it.
Yeah.
You get tired of listening to that when you know the solution is very simple, but for that person, you are just a pain. Telling them
Mm.
lose weight and you will be better and start running. Um,
So I'm really curious to know now, has this worked anywhere? Has it been tried in any countries or any cities that you can share with us?
I mean, we've been doing this for more than 100 years in Europe and in Asia. And it actually started in the US, which is the real irony here. They started it in the 1870s, but then made a mess of it by making it too political. And the point is, because these are commercial assets, you need to treat them in a complete isolation from politics. So when you set up a wealth fund, a public wealth fund, it needs to be managed as if it was a listed company. And that is really the trick. And as soon as you start having any kind of political meddling in running commercial assets, it all goes pear-shaped. And the US came up with the idea in the 1870s when they had their first real depression, which was before the famous one. And then Europe have done it since the 1920s when we had the more famous depression. And Italy was the first one, but we've done it in Finland, Sweden, everywhere. And the UK did it after the great financial crisis. They created UKFI, which took care of the banks that the government took on. So it's always used in a crisis. So that's why I relate to the heart attack, the broken leg, or the broken ligaments, etc. That's when people finally wake up. Okay, we need to seek professional help. How do we do this? How do we manage these assets? Okay, there's only one way, and that is put them in a professional company and start managing them professionally.
And that's fantastic that there's precedent and it's worked before and that we've done it before in crisis. It would be nice if it actually was something that happened all the time. That's what you're
Yes.
asking for, yes.
Yes. So Singapore, once who became independent in the 1960s, it was really a swampy outpost with no real. I mean, it was a developing country. It adopted this kind of thinking because it realized that policy making is one thing, managing government assets is another one. And this has been central for Singapore. In one generation, they took them from a developing country to a developed, or one of the most developed and wealthy countries in the world. And this is very much behind it. So Singapore is probably the one that has adopted it completely. And then other countries in Asia and Europe, they usually do it right after during a crisis. But then as soon as the crisis is over, most countries go back to the old habits of using taxes and debt instead.
It, you know, is exactly the same like somebody dieting that you go, you get into your exercise regime, you diet, and then you've lost the weight and you go back to your old habits and you put the weight back on. It is so similar. It's because you haven't really broken the habits, haven't you? You
Yeah.
haven't really changed. You've not changed the way you're doing things. So how is are you on a one man crusade or do you have support in what you're trying to do here?
Oh, there's lots of people who have seen this as a way forward. Um, and you know the you could say that the spectra of professionals go across the whole public financial management system. So you have accountants who do um, somebody like Ian Ball who created the first proper accounting system for governments with a balance sheet, and that was done in New Zealand almost 30 years ago. And you see New Zealand, over those 30 years, has managed its finances better than anybody. They have come out of, earthquakes, financial depressions, and they still have a balance sheet, and they focus on net worth instead of, like the rest of the world, focus on debt over GDP, which is a pretty meaningless. I mean, you wouldn't look at how much debt you have in relation to how many square meters your house has. You look at it over debt, how much is the house worth, and how much debt do you have on the house. So there is a net worth on the house. Every company does this. You do this. But governments insist and refuse to look at a balance sheet. They refuse to look at the assets. But New Zealand did this 30 years ago. So they focus on always keeping their net worth very strong, which has proven that this is the way to get out of all kinds of disasters. And even post-COVID, they were the developed economy that came out of it quickest. And they even got a debt rating that was raised just a few weeks after COVID was pretty much over for New Zealand.
Wow. Wow. It sounds so incredibly simple. It sounds so absolutely logical and intuitive. And it must be really frustrating for you that this isn't being adopted.
Well, I mean, I have a incredibly interesting job, but I mean, it's much more frustrating for the various people who are paying the taxes in vain, you could say, much
Yeah,
more. All the
absolutely.
countries that are, broken, or or cities that break, like Detroit and Puerto Rico or whatever, when it's not necessary.
And it's interesting what you're saying about the fact that, we as individuals don't look at debt over the square footage, as you said. I wrote that down. I do. We track our net worth. We actually do track our
Yes.
net worth. And yet, as you say, government isn't doing that. I do wonder because we've been talking about our government here in the UK and what they've been trying to do with regards to, recovery after the pandemic and what we're going through with Brexit and all that. And I don't want to get too political, but I do wonder if it's because there may not always be enough business people in government, people who really understand the commercial side of managing. That a lot of people, especially certainly in the UK, come from they're actually trained to be politicians. So is that part of the problem?
No, I think that would be too simplistic, because there's so many clever people, especially in a place like the UK, where the proximity between the city and Westminster is so close. And I mean, there's basically revolving doors. I mean, I used to be a banker in London, and so many of my old colleagues, are working in the Treasury or somewhere else. I mean, it's so there's lots of clever people. I mean, it's more the system. This is the way we do it. And and one thing which is, I mean, this is systematic, and it's because governments around the world are too influenced by economists. Nothing wrong with economists, but I'm not an economist. But in at university, when you study economics, you don't learn about accounting, and you cannot manage assets without understanding accounting. So for an economist, there is only cash, and that is like running. That is if you were running your business or your private wealth only from what you get in your credit card statement or your bank account statement, which is the cash in, cash out, and you never consider whether you have borrowed to buy a car or whether you have borrowed to buy a house, that doesn't show up. The only thing that shows up is when something hits your bank account, which
And
means,
that, yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, that is for you and me who just thinks about this, it's astonishing. Even somebody who is not trained in accounting, this is astonishing. But for an economist, it is, you wouldn't even consider looking at a balance sheet. And that is the big change that I think needs to happen.
Okay. Are you optimistic that these changes will happen?
Yes, a crisis will always, usually always makes things happen quicker,
Okay.
as we saw
That
with COVID.
Okay, that makes me happy
Yes.
that there is some hope, because certainly with regards to our the various governments around the world, we are in a lot of debt. So it'd be nice to see, and we are facing increases in taxes already at the moment. So that's
Yeah, but
interesting too.
all the people who don't think that taxes is the solution to everything. I mean, they need to scream. But then you have the whole financial market, all the investors that are screaming for yield, and they have been doing this for 30 years, as long as I've been a banker. But here we have an asset class which is twice global stock market, and nobody, it's not audited, it's not regulated, it's not even properly accounted for. That is a hidden gold mine that should make investors all over the world just scream or salivate, if you like, because this is such a hidden treasure.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm salivating as well, actually. So, Dag, what thought would you like to leave our listeners with regard to this? I mean, really thought-provoking and actually optimistic outlook.
Start exercising. It's never too late to start exercising.
I love that. Start exercising. That is wonderful. Dag, thank you so much. It's been really illuminating, really fascinating, something I know very little about. So I really appreciate it. Thank you for your
Thank
time.
you. Thank you.